PBS Video Library of World War II, we will look at war along the far reaches of the Pacific, from the jungle campaigns of New Guinea to the frozen battlegrounds in the Aleutian Islands, as well as events that took place along America's own Pacific coast. In the Aleutians, we will go along on the most fantastic invasion of World War II. There was no other like it in any theater. We will witness some of the greatest air and sea action of the entire Pacific War as we profile the most decorated ship in U.S. naval history, the Enterprise, the Fighting E. On the home front, the war against Japan prompted some extraordinary actions against one segment of America's population, the Japanese Americans, the Nisei. We'll recall their story. We begin with war in the South Pacific, in a chapter that explores the question, how do you fight an enemy who will not surrender? For an insight into the Japanese soldiers who fought in World War II, we go back to the Japanese of 1931.
1942, the South Pacific. The Japanese military planners have succeeded. The average Japanese soldier believes that if he surrenders, he brings disgrace not only upon his country and himself, but upon his whole family as well. Thus he will fight well, and he will die well. His mind admits no other possibilities. With a ceremonial sword, a bag of rice, and a bandolier of ammunition, the Japanese move into the rainforests of New Guinea. The Japanese soldier, the best jungle fighter in the world, pushes back the weak Australian forces and advances toward Port Moresby, the key to northern Australia. At Port Moresby, the Allied situation is critical. If the port falls, the Japanese have a forward base from which Australia will be invaded. Fresh American troops are led into the jungle by the Australians.
We weren't trained for this kind of fighting. We all thought we were going to fight in Europe, and here we were crashing around the jungle worrying about water snakes, mosquitoes, and malaria. New Guinea was the tail end of nowhere, and none of our equipment was worth a hoot in hell. You couldn't get tanks into that terrain. You could barely get the communications in. Everything was too heavy and too noisy. And up there, tied to the tops of palm trees, dug in caves, moving quieter than the jungle itself, were the Japs.
Although the Japanese forward party is stopped and surrounded, not one Japanese will surrender. Flamethrowers must be used to wipe out the enemy. Japanese die, but they do not surrender. Before the Japanese die, they kill an unexpectedly high number of Allied soldiers. How shall we fight an enemy who will not surrender? The American generals now know there will never be a decisive land battle in the South Pacific. We must find another way to fight the forgotten war and destroy the Japanese who will not surrender. There's only one tedious, long plan that may work. Kill the Japanese not with bullets, but with starvation. Here is the Allied plan of battle in the South Pacific. The Japanese supply chain to New Guinea seems vulnerable. We will attempt to blockade all supplies coming over water to New Guinea with sea power and air power. At the same time, the Japanese supply bases on New Guinea will be interdicted by American air power. The first step must be the destruction of the Japanese ground-based air power on New Guinea.
Top secret. Estimate of New Guinea-based Japanese Air Force. There is some misapprehension to the effect that the Japanese Air Force is a third-rate carbon copy of a Western Air Force. The facts are, the Japanese Zero has better high-altitude capabilities, better maneuverability than any plane the Allies own. The Japanese flyers in New Guinea were combat trained in China. They are as good as any group of Western pilots in the air. The Japanese spirit of death before surrender is evidenced by the fact that the Japanese airmen do not wear parachutes. Most serious. The Japanese bombers can operate 2,000 to 10,000 feet above any intercepting planes. Thus, the Japanese can bomb us at will. The American Air Force is operating with obsolescent P-39s and P-40s. Spare parts must be scavenged from wrecked planes. Everything is in short supply.
Shortly after this report was made, a new American fighter plane arrives in the Pacific. The twin-tail P-38, the Lightning, a rugged, fast plane which is supposedly designed to win superiority for the Americans at high altitude. But the P-38 is designed for the European war and must be adapted for South Pacific fighting. There are only a handful of them, not enough to win aerial supremacy unless they are used with the older and more numerous P-40s. Lightnings are flying top cover. Below the Lightnings are the P-40s, waiting to take on the enemy planes when the Lightnings drive them to middle altitudes. 25,000 feet. The Japanese Air Force aims at Port Moresby. 30,000 feet. The Lightnings dive to the attack. $20,000 feet. The American P-40s can complete the kill now that the Japanese planes have been forced down to the middle altitudes. "18,000 feet. Stripped of their fighter protection and driven to low altitudes, the Japanese bombers are vulnerable. "100 feet. With the air above them cleared, the American B-25s can counterattack. They come in at treetop level to strafe the enemy planes on the ground. Wewak, Bunamission, Salamau, Lai, the Japanese cannot control the air, even over their own airstrips. The first line of enemy pilots is rapidly being wiped out or exhausted. The Japanese know that unless they can reinforce these bases, they will have to be abandoned. If the New Guinea offensive is to continue, the airmen of the Emperor must be resupplied. In New Guinea, both sides not only fight each other, they fight for life in a land where civilized man cannot live.
In some parts of New Guinea, you could expect 120 inches of rain a year. You'd go for months without getting dry. The mud gave you trench foot, the stagnant water gave you mildew fungus in the inner ear. Mosquitoes, malaria, dengue fever. But no matter how sick or lonely you were, there was always somebody who was worse off. Because no disease is worse than combat, and nothing hurts more than shrapnel.
Still, the Americans have food and adequate medical supplies. The situation is worse for the Japanese. If the enemy's New Guinea offensive is to continue, the soldiers of the Emperor need help. 400 miles away, in the harbor of Rabaul, Japanese supplies for New Guinea. 400 miles away, everything needed to bolster the faltering attack of the Imperial Army. Message from General Imamuro, Japanese Army Commander, to Admiral Kusaka, Japanese Naval Commander. Request resupply of New Guinea garrison at Lai. field order from General Imamuro, 7,000 soldiers are ordered to reinforce the Papuan Peninsula of New Guinea by March 3rd, 1943. A Japanese convoy of 16 ships, including 4 warships, leaves New Britain. Resupply convoy departs Rabaul, New Guinea, 28 February 1943. Under the cover of bad weather, it will move through the Bismarck Sea. Under land-based air protection, the convoy will turn into Vitiaya Strait and proceed to Lai. Only one thing can stop the Japanese from reinforcing New Guinea: Allied air power. These are medium bombers, B-25s. They were built to bomb at 12,000 feet. The original idea was that the pilot would control 4 forward-firing machine guns. But in the South Pacific, the rules are thrown away. The bombardier has been eliminated, so the plane can be equipped with up to 14 machine guns firing forward. The high-altitude bomb sight has been thrown away. The oxygen equipment has been thrown away. These planes will fight the battle right down on the deck, just as low as they can get. Before the B-25s reach the battle area, the heavy, high-altitude B-17s prepare for the attack. The enemy ships begin a turning maneuver to spoil the bombardier's aim. The high-altitude attack is only moderately successful. Now the Royal Australian Beauforts and Beaufighters are brought down to the deck. B-25s are maneuvered into position. The concentrated low-level attack begins. At the critical moment, 500-pound bombs are skipped into the sides of the Japanese ships. firepower of the land-based aircraft is devastating. Of 16 ships, 12 will be beached or sunk. But the battle against Japanese supply is not over. The Allied planes bear inland, searching out the remnants of the enemy's material. The techniques that worked at masthead level will work at palm tree height. Fragmentation bombs attached to parachutes. Delayed action bombs. Rotting in the holds of the Japanese ships are supplies that will never reach their troops. Although the campaign in the South Pacific is far from over, Japanese offensive hopes lie broken on the water's edge. And the tides of the Bismarck Sea wash ashore the bodies of the men who were killed by Allied air power. Death has come to the soldier who 10 years before learned the goal of the Japanese warrior, victory or death. A bomb shock survivor is taken prisoner against his will. He must be tied down to prevent him from committing suicide. There is no greater disgrace than surrender. 10 years before, he had learned Bushido, the unbreakable code. Victory or death. Never surrender. Thus, the New Guinea rainforest closes around the starving Japanese. 100,000 bypassed Japanese in New Guinea will eat their last meal and then die in the rainforests. Without food, without medicine, the blockaded Japanese perish in New Guinea.
In our next story, the weather again played a major role in the fighting, but instead of the wet, steamy jungles of New Guinea, the hostile terrain was now the icy tundra of islands called Attu and Kiska. Part of the Aleutian Island chain stretching off the coast of Alaska. These frozen outposts were strategically important as stepping stones across the North Pacific.
The Japanese know that the Aleutians are stepping stones to Canada, to the United States itself. In June 1942, they strike. June 7, fog-bound Attu and Kiska are sighted by the Japanese, and 1,800 men are ordered to land. On Attu, the Japanese will find an American couple and 42 native Aleuts. On Kiska, nobody. Their only real enemy is tundra, the mushy, half-formed Aleutian mud. Men sink to their ankles, calves, sometimes knees. But they gain a mighty toehold in the vital Aleutians. The Americans occupy uninhabited Adak and Amchitka in August 1942 and January 1943. Now Kiska is only 15 minutes away by P-40 fighter plane. Attu, an hour. Stalemated, the two ground forces sit out a brutal winter. After the snows in the spring come the rain, the mud, and the Aleutian wind, the willowaw. In the spring, with better weather, the Americans take the offensive again. An amphibious task force steams north, bypasses Kiska, and levels its sights on Japanese-held Attu. Rear Admiral Francis W. Rockwell has set D-Day for May 7th, 1943. Code name for the operation, Land Grab. Storms force one postponement. The second comes when a pea soup Aleutian fog rolls in. May 9th, May 10th, then May 11th. The fog is lifted. The strike begins with a 1-2 softening up punch. The first from the air, the second from the big guns of the offshore fleet. Attu. Here the main U.S. force will hit at Massacre Bay. A battalion will strike near Holtz Bay, chief enemy base. Planned link-up day after tomorrow. It will take almost 2 weeks. Two regiments begin the move. They are misplaced desert fighters trained in California to battle Rommel in Africa. Almost at once, they get a bad break, fog. Finally, the fog begins to lift. The landing boats break standby circles and form assault lines. There is no enemy fire. There is still no enemy fire. Where are the Japanese? The question races up and down the invading line. A few enemy guns could slaughter the troops hitting the beach, wading through icy water, sitting ducks. GI boots, boots for the African desert, get wet and heavy. They are leather, the kind no old Aleutian hand ever would wear. They are a tragic mistake. Wet leather will cost soldiers their feet. They push inland toward the mountains, inland into silence, inland into still no Japanese. Again the question, where are the Japs? The Japanese are there. For the next 18 days, the GIs will know they are there. May 29th, down to 1,000 men, the Japanese launch a suicidal banzai attack. The Americans suffer heavily, but before the night is over, the Japanese army is destroyed. On D-Day, there were 2,300 Japanese defending Attu. Now only 22 survive. Among the dead are many who committed suicide. The American dead, 549. And leather boots, exposure to the Aleutian weather, have disabled more GIs than enemy bullets. Attu is ours. Now Kiska is only a 150-mile shuttle hop away. The Japanese Coral Islands, 600 miles. The engineers move in with their bulldozers, their linked steel matting, their skills. The island of Attu becomes the air base of Attu. These are the men who took Attu. These are the men who will have to take Kiska.
Think anything could be done with this country?
I sure do.
What do you think could be done with it?
I think it could be made a stock country myself.
How?
Well, you'd have to build sheds, cattle, maybe sheep.
Think so, huh? Wonderful if we, after the war, we could use this for some purpose,
sure.
wouldn't it? Think maybe you'd stick up here after the war and do it?
Well, why not? Well, hell, I'm single. Geez, I ain't got a worry in the world.
You haven't, huh?
Not a worry.
I see. Was that why you're fighting the war?
That's right. I'm volunteer.
Yeah, huh? That's right. That's it. You really believe in the war, don't you?
Don't bother me a bit.
Don't I?
I can take anything I can dish out.
June 1st, 1943, the Kiska campaign was on. During the next 75 days, 11th Air Force bombers dropped 1,255 tons of bombs on that tiny island. The flak was equally intense.
Follows up. Kiska gets an even heavier shelling than Attu. July 21st, flak from the island begins to slacken. On July 28th, it stops. So does Kiska radio. Recon planes return with detailed photographs of the island. Some pilots report seeing Japanese. Others see none. Aerial photographs are rushed to intelligence headquarters. Some experts say Kiska looks deserted. Others suspect enemy trickery, point out the island is blockaded. It couldn't be deserted. August 13th, 1943. A task force carrying 35,000 American and Canadian troops leaves Adak for Kiska. Soldiers wisecrack about the date. It is Friday, the 13th. They wisecrack, too, about the rumors they have heard about quiet Kiska, about pilots dropping propaganda leaflets urging the Japanese to surrender. The men are certain Kiska will be worse than Attu. Adak to Kiska is 2 days. Attu has taught much. Briefings are better now. Boots are rubber. Combat clothing has more pockets for food to live, grenades to kill. August 15th, the ships reach assigned positions off Kiska. The Americans hope to fool the Japanese at Kiska. PT boats will sweep in, carry not troops on their decks, but dummy wooden figures. This will come near Vega Bay. The main attack, with actual troops, will be launched across the island. Big naval guns open up. There is no Japanese reply. Some boats hit bottom short of land. The Bering Sea numbs soldiers' legs, even in August. At you veterans are grateful for their rubber boots. Again, the familiar question, where are the Japs? The troops push inland, still no Japanese. The main enemy bases are across the mountains. Perhaps they are there. Abandoned guns, oiled, ready, but no Japanese. Report from the front, there are no Japanese. Is this the right island? Order from the rear, keep looking, stay alert. American and Canadian troops conduct a tense 5-day search during which 56 GIs are mistakenly killed or wounded by their buddies. Plenty of abandoned equipment, booby traps, mines, not a single Japanese. There are no Japanese. 35,000 of our men have invaded a deserted island. The Japanese have vanished. No one knows where, how, until the Army finds Admiral Kawase's evacuation order. Intelligence Colonel Bill Verbeck translates and reads it.
Military secret. Commanding officer of the AO Defense Unit, Akiyama Katsuo. Regarding Operation K, orders to your subordinates. According to recent orders, this unit will discontinue the defense of Kiska Island, and with the North Sea garrison units, will transfer its entire force at once to X area. For a period of a little over a year since occupying this Kiska Island in June of last year, you have, under a very difficult situation, delayed the enemy's counterattack with a small number of troops. You have increasingly strengthened the defense, maintained an unconquerable position, and finally succeeded in preventing any enemy interference, and also displayed the power of the Imperial Navy. The success in the duty to secure Kiska Island was due to the bravery, courage, and endurance of all of you under the Emperor. In conclusion, I would like to give my deepest regards to those brave men who died gloriously on the field, and to the spirit of those who unfortunately died of illness.
And so the strangest invasion of World War II ends in a shattering anticlimax. On July 28th, the day Kiska Radio quit, 5,000 Japanese, under cover of fog, executed a brilliant maneuver, boarded transports, slipped through our blockade, and fled. For 18 days, we have bombed, shelled, and dropped propaganda leaflets on an uninhabited island. But now, Japan's northern threat is over. For the rest of the war, Alaska and our Arctic flank will be secure. The frozen war is won.
Unlike the war in Europe, the bulk of the Pacific campaign was not fought on a major land mass. It was war waged mainly on islands and on the sea and in the air across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. We'll look at that war now as we focus on one of the most gallant ships in the history of the U.S. Navy, the aircraft carrier Enterprise. We began back at the Day of Infamy.
Dawn, December 7th, 1941. The Enterprise returns to Pearl Harbor after a secret mission, ferrying fighter planes to beef up the Marine squadron on Wake Island. we are still at peace. 10 days earlier, starting for Wake, the admiral whose flag she flies had issued Battle Order Number 1, which said, the Enterprise is now operating under war conditions. His name is Halsey. A junior officer objected, Admiral, you can't start a private war. Now, 200 miles west of Pearl, Halsey launches a scout plane with a special message for Admiral Kimmel. He entrusts it to his operations officer, Lieutenant Commander Bromfield Nichol.
As we approached the western coast of Oahu, both the pilot and I noted, well up ahead in the direction of Fort Allen, quite a bit of smoke rising from several locations. We spoke to each other over the plane's intercommunication system about this, made note of it, thought no more about it until we crossed the shoreline at Barber's Point, where in the same direction could be seen much heavier smoke, also anti-aircraft bursts. Also, we could see over towards the southern shore what appeared to be shells splashing in the water. As we approached the air station on Fort Allen, I notified Brig Young, the pilot, that there was what appeared to be an Army fighter plane some distance above us and astern, in a very excellent position to make a run on us. Brig said he would watch out for it. As I was looking at it, the plane nosed over and did dive on us. I saw his guns shoot. Certain fragments came out of our wings, and as he flashed by to the side and below us, I saw the Jap insignia, the big orange ball on the side of the plane. We knew then what the situation was.
Before we're through, Halsey promises, the Japanese language will be spoken only in hell. December 9th, the Big E sails to war. Samoa to cover troop landings. Then she races north to the Marshalls. Now begin 4 years when the Enterprise will strike so fast in so many places that the Japanese will report her as 3 different carriers. 6 times they will claim to have sunk her. The first time at Pearl Harbor. These premature obituaries inspire her sailors to nickname her the Galloping Ghost of the Oahu Coast. February 1st, 1942. 9 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Halsey launches his planes 21 times, starting before dawn, and attacks for 9 straight hours. The Enterprise hits Watcha, Maloelap, Kwajalein, and pounds and pounds and pounds in her first offensive of the war. In April 42, she's at Shangri-La. Doolittle raids Tokyo from the Hornet with Enterprise standing by. Back to Pearl, and then midway, June 4th, into a trap that is baited by Japanese Admiral Yamamoto. The trap is never sprung because Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance counters with a brilliant tactic. He times his attack to hit the Japanese carriers just as their planes are on the deck refueling and helpless. But first he had to find the enemy. Lieutenant Commander C. Wade McCluskey, Jr. did the trick.
I expected to contact the Japanese striking force about 11:20. At reaching that point, about 19,000 feet altitude, there was no sight of the Japanese fleet. Quickly, I had to determine what decision I would make, whether to reverse course, circle, remain in the area, and await further information. I decided that the best course would be to proceed westward for another 20 minutes. After about 15 minutes, below me I sighted what appeared to be, I think, a Japanese cruiser. Later was determined to be a high-speed destroyer proceeding on a northeast course. I turned then and followed the course of this destroyer. About 10 minutes later, having binoculars, I was able to sight the Japanese fleet. Our attack was made about 12:20. And fortunately, we met no opposition in the air. There were no zeros in the air at all, so we had all full reign of making our diving without any trouble at all, without any opposition. Consequently, our bombing was pretty accurately done. And with the hits that we obtained, we put 2 of the ships out of commission.
McCluskey returns to the Enterprise, he has just 2 gallons of gas in his tanks. Enterprise, Hornet, Yorktown sink 4 Japanese carriers. We lose the Yorktown. But at Midway, Japan's superiority in the air is ended. Enterprise goes to Fiji. She covers the Marines on Guadalcanal, then speeds to the Santa Cruz Islands to keep the Japanese from reinforcing the Solomons. It has been a bitter summer. Saratoga is out of action. Wasp is sunk. Only Hornet and Enterprise remain afloat and fighting. Admiral Thomas Kincaid now commands the carriers. Off Santa Cruz, Enterprise and Hornet meet 4 Japanese carriers. 3 times bombs smash into the Enterprise. She keeps on fighting, but Hornet is not so lucky. Bombs, torpedoes, and suicide bombers. She is finished. Now Enterprise is wounded and alone, our only carrier on this wide and deadly ocean. She'll remain alone until Saratoga returns in December, 1 year after Pearl Harbor. The next year, 1943, is comparatively quiet for the Enterprise. New carriers relieve her, carriers built in the time her lonely vigil had bought. She goes home for refitting. In her many crossings of the equator, boys who had never lifted a hand in anger or left their inland valleys and city blocks become brine-soaked and hardened sons of old Neptune and of war. In November, she's back. Tarawa in the Gilberts, followed by Truk, the ocean fortress, followed by Ulithi, among others, Hollandia, and Guam, deep in the Marianas, the heart of the entire Japanese ocean stronghold. When they are won, the Marianas will provide long runways for the new B-29 Super Fortress bombers, which will strike with deadly regularity at Tokyo. To increase her cruising range, the Big E refuels at sea. Her planes cover her, but these are tense moments. June of 1944 finds her still in the Marianas, supporting the Marines' assault on Saipan. The Japanese, desperate to deny us the runways to Tokyo, bring up 9 carriers. Admiral Mark Mitcher now has 15 carriers, light and heavy, including Enterprise. This time we are ready. History will call these 2 days the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But to the men of the Enterprise, it will always be the great Marianas turkey shoot. Japanese lose more than 300 planes. The enemy fleet air arm is virtually destroyed. Most of our planes return safely, but not all. There's always a price for victory. In August, Big E strikes the Bonins. In October, she is in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And then Okinawa. By this time, the Japanese Navy is finished. The door to Japan hangs ajar. One more base, however, must still be had. That base is Okinawa. The Enterprise fights under a rain of deadly kamikazes, the Japanese suicide bombers. The Enterprise is hit for the last time. Her war is over. Of 22 major sea battles, she has been in 20. 15 times in all she has been hit, but here is what it cost the enemy. More than 900 planes and 71 enemy ships destroyed. 192 ships damaged. After the war, she returns to New York. Here she had been christened with a quotation from Shakespeare. May she also say with just pride, I have done the state some service. Who could deny her claim? She is the most decorated ship in U.S. naval history. She'll remain afloat until 1958, then go to the scrap heap.
The memory of the Fighting E lives on. In 1961, the Navy launched a giant new ship. It was the first nuclear-powered carrier and was then the world's largest warship, and they named it Enterprise. The name Nisei has largely dimmed in memory now, but once it provoked passion and hatred against all things Japanese. The Nisei were Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens. Like so many other lives, theirs changed dramatically on that awful Sunday in December 1941.
December 7th, 1941. 3 Japanese Americans remember that day.
It was Sunday. We were at home having breakfast, preparing to go to church. Then suddenly, an announcer came over the morning hour and announced that the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor. I was then a member of the aid station, a civil defense unit, and soon thereafter we were in action. In fact, I had the unfortunate duty of picking up the first civilian dead on December the 7th.
On Pearl Harbor Day, December 7, 1941, I happened to be in North Platte, Nebraska, talking to a group of Japanese Americans regarding the necessity for organizing to stress our citizenship and our loyalty to the United States. None of us knew that Pearl Harbor had happened, and the first inkling that I had that something was amiss was when I was thrown into jail in North Platte, Nebraska.
I turned on the radio, and we heard Pearl Harbor bombed by the Japanese. My brother looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, we are in trouble.
The FBI rounds up all Japanese aliens who could, for any reason, be considered dangerous, such as fishermen, leaders of Japanese societies, veterans of the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. There is little public hysteria. A boy writes, "In school, I am proud to say, everyone treated us as the Americans we are." On the West Coast, there are 41,000 Japanese aliens who arrived before 1924, when Congress stopped all immigration from Asia. By February 1942, 1,266 are in custody. The Justice Department is convinced the rest are harmless and should remain free. They all must register as enemy aliens, however. These immigrants, mostly elderly, barred from citizenship because they are Orientals, are the parents of the Nisei. The Nisei are citizens by birth. There are more than 71,000 of them, most under 28 years of age. As cameras are inspected, shortwave bands removed from radios, these frightened people are attacked by rumor. Nothing helpful to the enemy is found, but Japan is making frightening strides southwestward in the Pacific. Reports, all false, come from Pearl Harbor of aid to the enemy during the bombing. Enemy planes and scare headlines on December 8th are purely imaginary. But on February 23rd, 1942, a submarine does shell a refinery near Santa Barbara. The highest military authorities are certain the enemy does not plan an invasion, but behind the defenses, fear is screaming hate. Columnist Westbrook Pegler wants all Japanese under guard, and to hell with habeas corpus. Columnist Henry McLemore writes, "I hate Japanese, all of them." A spokesman for farmers charged with wanting to get rid of Japanese competitors for selfish reasons says, "We do. And we don't want them back after the war either." A general tells Washington of pressure from the best people in California to move all Japanese.
The general who asked the President of the United States for the power to evacuate was General John L. DeWitt, commanding general of the Western Defense Command. And before a congressional committee, he said very emphatically that from his experience over the years as an Army officer, he knew that a Jap's a Jap, and a scrap of paper attesting to his citizenship doesn't alter that fact. Earl Warren, as the Attorney General of California, was a chief law enforcement officer for that state. Before the Tolling Committee in San Francisco in April of 1942, Earl Warren declared that the American-born Japanese was more dangerous to the security of the United States than even the alien Japanese. And this was because we spoke the English language, we understood the American ways. And since we were bound to help the Japanese invader, this made us more dangerous than even the enemy alien who happened to be our parents. Walter Lippmann, a very distinguished columnist then as now, noted in his editorial, noted in his columns, that one reason why the Japanese Americans and the Japanese on the West Coast were so dangerous was because there had been not a single act of espionage or sabotage on our part, because the Japanese, many years before, had organized us so carefully that we had deliberately refrained from taking part in any of these activities to call attention on ourselves. And that when the Japanese invaded the West Coast, then we would rise up and aid them against the United States.
Abruptly in late winter, DeWitt orders evacuation of all Japanese from the coast. Stores, farms, homes are hurriedly sold. Lives are uprooted. The nation has three major enemies, Germany, Italy, and Japan. But only the Japanese are so treated. Where did DeWitt get the authority? 7 West Coast congressmen have asked President Roosevelt to move all Japanese, immigrants and American-born Nisei alike. The president vigorously approves. Move anyone, citizen or alien, as military necessity requires. Only a curfew is imposed on 80,000 German and Italian aliens on the West Coast, But the Nisei and their parents are moved en masse, and the United States now has 112,000 prisoners of war. Many Japanese Americans, to prove their loyalty, willingly move to inland areas, voluntary evacuation. They are met with violence and threats. Now, to protect them, he says, DeWitt orders all into assembly centers, racetracks, and fairgrounds. And Nisei, who wrote and illustrated a book about the evacuation.
The heads of the family and the single persons were ordered to report and register, and we were given our family number and tags. We were told what to bring and what not to bring, and told what to wear for pioneer life in camp. We had 3 days and 3 nights to pack and get ready. Some of the things we left, some of the things we gave away, and some of the things we stored with the government. Baggages were heaped high on the sidewalks for blocks. Buses were lined up in the street for blocks. We lined up single file, paraded in front of everybody, and entered the bus. The guards were still standing, and the friends were waving goodbye to us, and the public was gawking. We crossed the Bay Bridge in silence, traveled several miles south, and arrived at the Tanforan Assembly Center. As it entered, we saw heaps of baggages with family names dumped here and there. The bus drove in front of the grandstand, and we got out, and we were searched for contraband, straight-edged razor and knives and liquor. And then we went to the registration table and were assigned our stable 16 and stall 50. The guide then took us across the center field to our stable and stall. We went inside to the dark, dimly lit back part and saw 2 army cots against the wall. My brother opened one, and I opened the other, and we sat in the dark looking at each other. By then, it was 10 o'clock, and we decided we'll hit the hay. But it turned out so cold that we finally had to open everything in the bags and the suitcases and spread it on top of us. We could hear every noise, but we were so tired that finally, about 12 o'clock, fell asleep. That was our first night in camp.
In Hawaii, 3,000 miles closer to the enemy, with 1/3 of its population of Japanese descent, nothing like this occurs. What had the mainland Japanese Americans done? The Dean of Yale Law School, Eugene V. Rostow.
The basic idea behind the orders and the statute and the decisions made by the political and military authorities of the United States was that people of Japanese descent, American citizens of Japanese descent, were presumed by reason of their descent, their blood, their ethnic background, to possess certain political ideas which were hostile to the United States. They were presumed to be disloyal simply because of their descent. Now, the basic rule of civilized society and of the legal system of civilized society is that men can be punished by the criminal law only for acts, not for thoughts, not for intentions, not for hopes or fears or dreams. Only acts. There was no evidence whatever presented by the military or by the Department of Justice, none, to support the hypothesis that there was danger to be expected or treasonable acts committed by the people who were involved and the people who were punished. These men and women and children were removed from their homes, taken into physical custody by military or paramilitary forces of the United States, confined against their will in camps maintained by the United States, even though they had no trials, even though they had no rights of confrontation of witnesses against them, even though there were no juries, no courts, no lawyers, none of the usual familiar protections of due process of law.
June 1942, Santa Anita Racetrack. The now president of the Japanese American Citizens League.
At the Santa Anita Assembly Center, 19,000 people were crowded into this one plant. Since the stay was supposedly temporary, many of us did not give much thought to anything organized. However, when the stay went beyond 2 weeks, into a month, into 2 months, things were quite chaotic, and we felt that unless some thought was given to some order, that people were becoming quite disgruntled, people were becoming rebellious. So some of us got together and decided to organize what we called a self-government, and we divided into various districts, had the individuals residing in those areas vote for their own representatives. This is how we were able to survive the 7 months. We set up libraries, we set up various activity groups. We had 88 softball games going on at one time. People were dying, people were being born. So this was quite a community of 19,000 individuals in one small area.
The evacuation goes on, even though the great American naval victory in the Battle of Midway on June 6th closes out the last remote possibility of invasion of the West Coast. 10 tar paper cities rise in deserts and backwoods from Northern California to Arkansas. The internees are transported hundreds of miles to barracks designed for young, unmarried soldiers. Infants born in captivity, whole families, are now hemmed in by mud, barbed wire, and guns. In this chaotic chow line environment, the immigrant domination of the family is weakened. The Nisei, English their native language, come to the fore, negotiate with the authorities, get status their elders cannot. Food, clothing become institutional concerns, no longer family matters. Some people get a chance to do war work, like experimenting with synthetic rubber. Some make camouflage nets. Objections from private industry prevent other projects. When labor shortages press the country, the Nisei are permitted to help save the sugar beet crop. Schools go up. Pre-war Nisei are proportionally the best educated minority in the country. But on the West Coast, college degrees have often led only to jobs in fruit stands. Nisei doctors and nurses in the camps draw inmate wages, $16 to $19 a month. The urge toward harmony and beauty still lives, but one angry Nisei says, "If any Nisei thinks he is an American, I dare him to walk out of this prison." Early in 1943, the government wants to reopen the draft to the Nisei, resettle the internees. All in the camps get a loyalty questionnaire, which is clumsily handled. Many citizens reject the questionnaire to protest imprisonment. For a few, this eventually leads to giving up citizenship. But the great majority of internees want to be what they are at heart, Americans. Out of this turmoil comes the volunteer 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Many Nisei feel that Japanese Americans can never have peace unless they write a record of loyalty in blood. A Nisei who won the Distinguished Service Cross and lost an arm in Italy, United States Senator Inoue.
During our training, we were advised by our commanding officer that according to the official ruling of some of the officials in Mississippi, that while we were there in Mississippi training, we would be considered as white people. Therefore, we were told not to enter through doors that said colored, not to go to colored restaurants, to go through the white entrance to go to theaters or sit in the front of the bus. It was a rather comical situation. Here we were colored because we weren't white, but yet in Mississippi, all of a sudden we became white folks.
I had with my Fifth Army in Italy many nationalities, 16, I believe. And I took in with me 5,000 Japanese American, referred to as the Niseis. General Marshall had given me instructions that as soon as I put them into combat to give him an immediate report on their capacity for fighting, their loyalty and all about it. Their first battle soon took place after we landed at Salerno, and I was utterly amazed at their fighting capacity. They were valorous, they were willing to give their lives readily, and I gave a glowing report to General Marshall and said, if you've got any more, send them to me.
The Nisei are dying for their country, but their families are behind barbed wire at home. When the Nisei GIs return, their USO is in an internment camp. And it is little known, even here, that 3,000 Japanese Americans, Nisei and immigrant, also are in the Pacific and dying there. With the 442nd's fame helping pave the way, by 1944, 36,000 internees take the gamble on resettlement. For many, it is the first step outside the little Tokyos of the coast. Chicago and the Midwest receive them warmly. Many never return to old homes, making new lives where they find them. Now in France, in October 1944, the 442nd is rapidly becoming the most decorated unit in the U.S. Army. It includes 2 battalions of infantry from the mainland, the 100th Battalion from Hawaii, field artillery, and combat engineers. Their motto is, "Go for broke." A battalion of the 36th Texas Division is surrounded in the Vosges Mountains near Bruyères. It will be the Nisei's most terrible fight. The Nisei saved 287 men of the lost battalion. Of these young men with Oriental faces who want to be known not as Japanese Americans, but simply as Americans, 1,800 are wounded, 140 more are dead. In Europe, the Nisei start coming home. Thousands, including women, have been in the Army. But on the West Coast, their returning families are being met with bullets and arson. California will seize immigrants' land. But Caucasian friends come forward. Congress will repay, in part, evacuation losses. The immigrants will gain citizenship. The change, however, will take time. Senator Inouye.
I was finally determined by the retirement board that I was ready to go back to Hawaii. So I was shipped to California to wait for a transport ship to carry me back to Honolulu. While in California, I decided that I should do something to myself to prepare myself for reunion with my folks. So I went to a barber shop to get myself a haircut. But as I walked in, I was stopped by one of the barbers there. He looked at me and he said, "Are you a Chinaman?" And I said, "No, I'm an American." He says, "No, where do your folks come from?" I said, "They're from Hawaii, and they're Americans also." "Well, where did your grandparents come from?" "They're from Japan. We don't serve Japs here." I was in my uniform on that day, I was a captain in the United States Army. I had 3 rows of ribbons to show that I had fought in the war, that I had been wounded several times, that I had been decorated by the President and by the Congress. But yet to this man, this barber, a fellow American, an American that I had tried my best to defend during the war, had decided that I was not qualified, nor was I fit to sit in his barber's chair to just get a simple haircut.
On July 15th, 1946, President Harry Truman pins a 7th presidential citation streamer to the 442nd's flag.
Citizenship in this great republic of ours means much more than race or creed or religion. You fought for the liberties of the world along with the rest of us. I congratulate you on that, and I can't tell you how very much I appreciate the privilege of being able to show you just how much the United States of America thinks of what you've done.
The Nisei have written their record of loyalty in blood. But while winning their case on the battlefield, they have lost a case in court. In 1944, the Supreme Court refused to question the military judgment that a real necessity existed for the evacuation and the exile. It established for the first time the military right to imprison civilian citizens arbitrarily, even when civil courts are open and functioning. One dissenting justice said, "This principle is a loaded weapon for any authority making a claim of urgent need." This loaded weapon is still a part of American law.
The story of the Nisei is not yet ended. More than 4 decades after the controversy began, there still is debate about the legality of U.S. actions. A national commission recently recommended a government apology to the Nisei. There's talk of reparations to the remaining survivors. There are lawsuits pending. Congress and the courts have yet to write the close to this chapter. The treatment of the Nisei remains one of the enduring legacies of that tumultuous time in history. For the CBS Video Library of World War II, I'm Walter